Market Prospects, delivering timely information and education to prairie farmers for over 25 years. Market Prospects is brought to you by the University of Saskatchewan's Department of Bioresource Policy, Business and Economics, and these sponsors. Log on to marketprospects.usask.ca to view past programs and for information on upcoming programs.
Grain transportation has been a hot-button issue in the news in recent months. This week on our Market Prospects interview, we take a close look at the Western Canadian grain supply chain. Joining us in studio is Dr. James Nolan, economist with the Department of Bioresource Policy, Business and Economics at the University of Saskatchewan. Great to have on Farmgate.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Right off the top then, loading of ocean freighters is tied closely to grain supply efficiency. How has the system been working and what does it tell us?
Well, the system's been better. The order of council that the government put in to order the railways to move a certain number of cars per week has actually seemed to have worked a bit. There is still some backlog at the port, and that's due somewhat to storage issues, but also the fact that the proper grain is not getting there at the right time. So there's some blending issues at the port, so it slowed down a little bit there. But and we can talk about this in a second. But basically, there are some solutions to that which maybe we can think about. But for now, it seems to me that, and everybody's telling me that in fact the grain's not moving out very efficiently, as efficiently as they thought it would when they put the order of council in last year or 3 or 4 months ago.
So what are some of the bottlenecks, and then what are some of the potential solutions?
Right. The bottlenecks in the supply chain right now, there are a couple of them. One is that the grain companies have now become the primary mover of grain, and there's a bit of a transitional issue going on right now. The wheat board formerly handled this function of grain logistics, and now the grain companies are doing it, a la the way they used to run their canola. And also the railways are a bit of a problem too. And again, the issue there is how much are they moving with oil? How is oil backing up some of the movements that are happening in grain, et cetera? And so those things combined are kind of holding things up a little bit. Even with the order of council, which in fact the railways were able to meet, they're still a little bit behind schedules to where they wanted to be. And that was sort of predicted about several months ago.
So do you think that the system that's evolving can work efficiently over time without some type of coordinating agency?
Well, in fact, that's the one thing that was overlooked when the board was removed. In fact, they were the coordinating agency that kind of got all the players together and kind of met everybody in the same room, literally, and said, okay, what kind of cars do we need? Where do they have to go? Where do they? Are we going to go to Vancouver, Thunder Bay, Rupert, wherever? One of the things that we've been talking about, kind of as a department, and some of the research I have done, is about making the system for rail side more competitive. And by that, there's something called essentially extended interswitching. And what that does, that essentially says if you are a shipper and you want to get a competing railway in to move your shipment, you can actually ask for that through the government. It will be a regulated policy. It's coming through the system right now. It's been held up a little bit through process. But essentially what it will do is bring in potentially U.S. railways like Burlington Northern into the system. So if I'm a shipper somewhere near the border moving grain, let's say out of Alberta or Saskatchewan, I can call this interswitch and potentially get Burlington Northern to come up and get my grain and move it out. And that's one of the advantages, one of the sort of pro-competitive things going on. That leads to a process where, is it the rail system, which is really a big problem, or is it the grain handling companies? Is it the grain handling sort of system or grain company system? And what we found in some research I've done with a colleague of mine, Metin, who's now at the University of Minnesota, we found out that essentially if you have a supply chain, and that means from farmer to grain company to railway to port, if you have a grain supply chain, and if the pieces of supply chain, not the farmers, have market power. So for example, the railways, let's say there are a couple of them, the grain companies, there are 2 or 3 grain companies. When they start exerting market power, guess what? Any revenues in that chain start to change distributionally. So it means the farmers essentially get less. So what happened, we have some data from last year that showed when basis went up and shot through the roof, it was essentially all absorbed by the grain companies and the railways. And of course, the railways were constrained by the revenue cap, so they weren't taking as much as maybe they could have in a free market system. So essentially what happened was the farmers got about the same they always did, or a little less, but that extra revenue they thought they might get with the wheat board in place went to the grain company. So they were extracting all the rent. So the real issue now in this sort of post-wheat board era is we knew the rail sector had problems competitively and probably needed some help. And we think we've sort of fixed that with this extended interswitching process and other things that are happening. But the grain companies, no one really knows anything about them, Bob. No one really knows, we talk about something called economies of scale, and that's, the bigger you are, the cheaper you do things. And basically, we actually don't know what that minimum cost level size is for grain companies. So for example, will the industry stay the 6, 7 players it is right now, or will it consolidate and merge down to 2 or 3? And that's sort of what we're thinking is going right now. In fact, some of the research that I'm going to be doing over the next couple of months will be sort of investigating that issue. And really, it's an open book right now. No one actually knows the answer to that question. How many grain companies are going to be left once this plays out?
So in the future, where are the profits in the system going to flow, and how can farmers maybe access that larger share, I guess? Right.
The profits right now, the models we've done, basically the farmers always sort of sit at the bottom of the totem pole, as it were. Essentially, the way to actually try to fix the system is to make sure that, and from the stuff that we've done, you can fix the rail system, but you really need to get the grain companies in order too. So there may end up being, at some point, I'm not suggesting this either, but it's possible that in 5, 6 years' time, if we're down to 2 or 3 grain companies, that people are going to complain as loudly about them as they do about the railways in terms of the market power issue. So how do we regulate that? And that is an open question. Like I said, the rail side, with interswitching, which is like an access, you're getting more competition in the system. I actually think the rail system is not going to be they're going to extract their rent the way they always do, because there are only a couple of them. They're going to have fringe competition going on. But the grain companies could end up being the real kind of, wild card in this whole process as to what they're going to do and how much rent they're going to extract. But again, I hate to say this, but all the models we run, essentially the farmer ends up not doing very well. The farmer ends up with sort of the bottom end. I think the numbers we came up with are something like, if you take $1, farmers might get anywhere from, let's say, in the competitive system where you have market power in the railway and in the grain company system, they might get something like 20% of the revenue. Right now, they're getting a little bit more than that. They're getting, depending on the year and everything else, they're getting something like 40, 50, 60%, but they're going to get a lot less if the system keeps going the way it is, according to our models. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's what we're modeling, essentially. So.
Well, Dr. Nolan, great information, and I look forward to some more results from your studies in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bob. Take care.
Thanks for coming on Farmgate.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll break again, or back in 2 minutes. Please stay with us.